Matt Messina, as well as Allison Smith and Mike Moriarty is our bureau chief. And from KDHE's Bureau of Air, we have Kathleen Waters. And we also have a consultant team that is going to be assisting us with this project and has been assisting us. The lead on that is Agnes Otto. And we also have on hand Phil Herman, Kyle Penn, Lisa Kay Hummel, and Susan Martinovich. So getting into today's agenda, we're going to do an overview of the RFP. We'll run through some of the eligible items for eligible applicants, eligible expenses in the proposals, and non-eligible items for the proposals. We'll also give a review over the locations that have been identified for priority. We'll do an overview of the commitments that any awardee would be subject to upon awards. We'll give an overview of what the application consists of and how you'll be scored if you choose to submit an application. We'll run through a summarized schedule and then share some links before we get into the open Q&A period. So beginning with the RFP overview, we took on the task with our partners at KDHE to help with this portion of administering the Volkswagen settlement funds. These funds are specific to developing a network of direct current fast charging infrastructure for fueling electric vehicles. We have about $2 million to be awarded for this. And one of the primary goals for the agency is to continue developing a corridor where fast charging equipment is accessible within 50 miles apart on primary corridors. The process for applications is going to be competitive, and there is opportunity to be funded up to 80% of eligible expenses. Like I mentioned earlier, we've identified a series of locations that have been provided in the preceding RFI, the RFP, and we have a map that we'll be able to show later on in the presentation. These priority locations and corridors were developed in partnership with the Clean Cities Electric Vehicle Working Group, which consists of stakeholders from around the state for multiple hats, entities of private industry, local communities, and leadership. To make it clear, we want to state that applicants are able to apply for one location, all 12 locations, or any number of locations in between. And we'll get to that portion of the application later on that demonstrates how we'd like to see that recorded in the proposals. Applicants are also eligible to apply for alternative locations, but please be mindful of the desire to focus on what we've listed as priority locations and priority corridors. So this RFP that we've developed and issued was guided by the input that we received during the RFI process back in September. We had about 30 to 40 responses asking questions of what we can make changes to make this program a little bit more accessible and convenient for anyone that wished to apply. So some of the big key things that we changed were that respondents to this RFP are not required to have also responded to the RFI. We have made some adjustments to the charging capacities for the electric vehicle charging equipment, and then that has been scaled to be reflected in the scoring criteria with lower output at a lower scale and higher output at the higher scale. We also allowed for a little bit more time between the announcement of the open RFP and the deadline for submitting an application. I believe it was an extension of about 4 weeks, which is now December 15th, 2021. That's when applications will be due. And we also made a change to how we would be accepting invoices to be able to be reimbursed for these projects after being awarded. That can either be one lump sum after the completion of the project or incremental invoices monthly, or no more than monthly and no less than $1,000. Next slide. So go over some of the eligibilities, starting with the applicants. This is a wide open call. We really didn't have any restrictions on who could be eligible. So that's businesses, utility companies, any type of local government, nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, and it's highly encouraged that all of those submit letters of support from any interested partners that they would be submitting an application coordination with. So partnering letters of engagement and commitment would be required or highly encouraged to be provided from the site host of where the infrastructure would be installed. A utility letter of service from whatever entity is responsible for the utility services in the region of the location. Any academic partnership, if you do wish to pursue a partner with an academic institution, and any other letters of support from community representatives, community groups, anyone else that you feel would be able to support the proposal that you're making when requesting the funds. Next slide. And some of the eligible costs. This is outlined in detail in the RFP, but going over it here, you can see that obviously the DC fast charging equipment is eligible, and that relates to any of the equipment to make it operable and serviceable for a minimum of 5 years. That also includes the installation, the equipment, any type of services to be able to hook up and have the connections, site preparation, and you can see the list goes on. All of these are items that would be eligible for reimbursement up to 80% should you be selected to receive funding. Next slide. Some of the ineligible costs, which would be 100% of the applicant's responsibility to cover, would be the purchase or rental of the real estate that is the intended location for the infrastructure charging equipment. Any other capital costs, such as construction of buildings or the parking facilities to house the amenities or the charging equipment. General maintenance, other than that, of the charging equipment and its service capabilities. Administrative costs, battery storage serving the charging equipment, solar photovoltaic panels providing power to the charging equipment, the cost of electricity to power the EV charging equipment, and any restriping or repaving, resurfacing of the parking lots that are not related to the installation of the charging equipment. So as mentioned earlier, there are 12 areas that have been identified as priority locations along priority corridors to help build out a network of direct current fast charge charging stations across the state. You can see a majority exist on Interstate 70, moving on to I-35, I-135, and also US 81. So these locations were developed to help build out a network inconsistent with the Alternatives Fuels Corridor that is a national program. And these locations fill in existing gaps that help us build out a network where stations can be accessible within 50 miles apart from one another. So that's how we came to the determination of this list. And a note that we have on the map and in the RFP is that the location number 1 through 12 is not an indication of the rank in priority. It's just an assignment number to help identify the location on the map. Next slide. So here's the map, the layout. You can see the yellow line outlining the priority corridors with the numbers associated with the locations, the specific locations of the preferred areas or locations to have the charging equipment installed. Again, these are just the priority locations, and applicants are eligible and encouraged to submit interest for any location that's not identified on the map. There will be plenty of other scoring criteria that would be evaluated to help make this competitive for other locations as well. Next slide. So to be sure of what you'd be getting into when applying, and if you're to be awarded, we wanted to make sure that you're aware of these commitments. So this is a 5-year term to have the vehicle accessible to the public for 5 years after the installation and the chargers are up and running. There will be a reporting requirement. Some pre-installation reporting will occur monthly for awardees to help us keep project on track, make sure that we are all on the same page, and the project is going to meet my major milestones and its intended completion date, so that we can begin monitoring the post-installation information related to what we need to provide back to the Volkswagen settlement, and as well as for any future needs that we could have on hand for developing a larger network and set of data for tracking trends for the state. There are also a handful of equipment and installation requirements, which are outlined in detail in the RFP. And this will be a project where any awardees will be subject to entering into a contract with the Secretary of Transportation. Next slide. So going through the application, we did make this a fillable PDF. You can fill it out on the KDOT website where this is accessible, or you can print it out and hand write it in if you need to. You can download it, enter it in, work on it over a period of time and get it submitted to us. The goal here is to have it nice and neat and legible and easy for us to read what is written and submitted for locations and for signatures and for project scope and business plans, and all of it to be submitted in one PDF document, no larger than 35 megabytes. And that application will be due on December 15th. Next slide. So as mentioned earlier, we are encouraging applicants to submit for one or multiple locations. Should any of you be interested in more than one location, we are requesting that you include multiple sections for sections D, E, F, and G for each charging station location. This will help us keep track of all the different amenities and site location differences between your separate proposals. Next slide. Going through the evaluation criteria, there is a total possible points of 100. The largest category being the location, the amenities provided to service anyone that would be accessing the charging infrastructure, and to be ADA compliant. That's the charging station itself, as well as the connecting piece and the amenities for the use of the general public. 10 points for the equipment, any of the charging equipment that you'd have available, being direct current, that could include its charging capacity and future proofing and upgradability for another 10 points. We also have the innovation category, where that would be anything that you are able to make a case that is a new feature or a new potential product that would be getting us a foot in the right direction towards an EV future. 10 points for a demonstrated experience. If you have any experience in the electric vehicle world or charging infrastructure, that'd be very helpful. 20 points that shows your business model and budget, showing something that's structured, fair, and balanced, and that meets the terms of the 5-year reporting of all the different requirements that we ask of you. 3 points for the demonstration of your partnerships and letters of support from the various categories mentioned earlier. 5 points for being able to provide a larger match requirement, which helps us to disperse even more funds across more projects. And 2 points for applicants that can demonstrate an accelerated schedule to have these projects and charging equipment up and running by a specified timeline. Next slide. So looking at the schedule here, today being November 2nd, we are in the pre-proposal meeting. We are going to be having a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but we'll also have a timeline for you to submit written questions to our design contracts folks that will be submitted and published to our KDOT website on November 16th. Those written questions will be due November 10th, so we'll have about 8 days between today and then for when they need to be due and submitted. So if you don't have any questions today, you can continue to work on those and think of things as you look through the RFP, look through the application, and if you develop any other questions, we'll have time to answer those still. By December 15th, the applications are due and need to be submitted to design contracts per the guidance provided in the RFP. And we are anticipating the announcement of awards of project selection by January 14th, 2022. So kind of a tight turnaround. So a couple of links to the updates. These won't be accessible to you right here and right now. These slides will be made available on the KDOT website where all this information is being housed. That's where you'll be able to download the RFP, look at the Q&A once that's posted, download the application form. We'll get these slides posted there as well as a recording of this session. For any of the questions that you do have between now and the 10th, you can reach out to kdot.designcontracts@ks.gov to ask those questions to have posted by November 16th. And now we'll be going into the question and answer period. So again, we have a handful of consultants and KDOT staff on hand. I do want to mention that this is a newer and unique type of project for KDOT. So it's possible that we may not have an immediate answer to your question. So we'll work with our team to put something together, get a response available, and make that available to you after this meeting. So we're asking all participants to either raise the hand or use the chat box to submit questions during this Q&A period. And looks like we already have a couple.
Yep. Larry, are you able to unmute?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well.
Okay, good. I have 3 questions. First, the easy ones. What does the elongated versus circular areas on the map mean? I know that's 5 miles from the intersection. Some are circular, would indicate to me from an exact intersection. The elongated ones would kind of indicate fluffiness about which intersection.
So if we can scroll up to the table of the locations, that'd be more helpful to explain that. So you can see number 1 there. The location is actually Oakley, Grainfield, Grinnell area. So that kind of gets a little bit more of an oblong bubble to encapsulate that stretch of corridor.
Okay, so it's not going to be the specific intersection then as in the circular ones. 9's oblong, 10 would be oblong, things like that.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on the ADA requirements, I understand the charging stations need to be ADA. Does, for example, the slope of the pavement need to be ADA? The travel path to the amenities need to be ADA? The actual restrooms, et cetera, need to be ADA? And
So-
do you need the do you need at least one 11-foot wide parking place with the 5-foot marked out on the side?
So if we can go back to the scoring slide.
Let's see. This one?
Yes. So you can see there's a wide range of points available in that category. The main goal would be to have at least the charging station and its features accessible. However, the higher score would go to that being a safe and connected, ADA access to the other amenities as well, such as the restroom or the convenience store.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then one other question. I note that in the application, vendors can apply, and yes, I am a vendor. There's two types of vendors: third-party owner-operators that simply lease other people's space and own the stations themselves, or ones like us who sell and install ourselves, and the owner ends up, the host site ends up owning the station. I also noticed there's words in the application that indicate a desire for you to understand in the application how solid the host sites are. In other words, have they committed? Have they not committed? All that good sort of stuff. I'm reading between the lines, and I'm thinking, are you saying that a vendor like us who sells and installs can submit an application with potential host sites that have not signed on firmly, or if we submitted, it would be on behalf of a site host who is committed, and most likely they would be submitting, not us.
So it sounds like the answer to your question is yes, it can go either way. So if you can provide the narrative that would explain that you're in talks with a host site, that could be an option. Or you can also now between now and December 15th, partner with the potential host and get the letter of support and draft that language into your kind of business model.
Yeah, of course, we would do
Okay.
our best to have hosts locked down, identified, committed by application submittal time.
Right.
But I was wondering the other option. And then also, if we don't have firm hosts, that means there may not be firm costing. How do you handle that if there were not firm costing in here? And I understand that's a awkward question, but if you don't have a firm site, you don't necessarily have firm costing. How do you handle that?
So that's all part of the scoring rubric. We try to make that assessment of just how firm this partnership seems. If it's, a very strong connection between site and app, or a site host and applicant, that's going to get a higher score. If it doesn't seem that it's all there yet, it's going to get a slightly less score.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your questions.
I have a couple questions in the chat box. I also just wanted to verbalize, if you've dialed in only and you would like to raise your hand, you can hit *9 and then *6. You can also ask in the chat. So the first question in the chat from Amanda is, do you have the link to the full RFP? The one that is currently available that she has says no longer valid.
I just submitted one into the chat for that.
Great. And then the second question is, what size of DC/FC dispensers are you wanting?
So all that detail is listed in the specs. I don't believe that there's anything that's specific to the size of the dispensers. So that's up to any applicant to submit their equipment that they're going to be likely proceeding with. as long as it meets the specs that are identified in the RFP under section 5. And
Currently, no other questions in the chat and no raised hands, so please feel free to do
Cool.
so if you got one.
I also want to ask if that helps answer that question. Maybe I'm not reading that correctly, or what size of DCFC dispenser are you wanting?
Mark,
I
are you
feel
on?
like I answered it.
Yeah. Mark, just let us know in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to ask your verbal question. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see, I'm gonna find Mark. He'd like to.
We've got a hand up too.
Okay, my question is, I think the minimum is 50 kilowatts is what I remember reading, but is there, but I also read something about 100 kilowatts or 350 kilowatts. Do you have an area that you're looking for these DC fast chargers?
Okay, so you're talking about the charging capacity, and that's one of the things that we had mentioned was a shift from what was listed in the RFI to the RFP. So there is a little bit more of a range, and that will be scaled based on its output. The points assigned in the scoring process would be scaled based on the higher output, higher capability.
Okay, thanks.
Lisa, if you would share the RFP document and open it up to page 3, we could show Mark exactly where that is in the RFP.
Mm-hmm.
And while she's pulling that up, if you want to open up Andy Matson's mic, Andy could ask his question. Oh, you did that so fast. Maybe we'll just go right there.
Okay, page 3.
Scroll down to the bottom of page 3, and it's item number 5. There you go. So, Matt, you want to just walk through that?
Yeah, so the stations with 2 DCFC ports must be capable of providing at least 100 kilowatt charging for a single vehicle and at least 50 kilowatt simultaneous charging for 2 vehicles. So that's the minimum. Does that cover it better for you, Mark?
I'm going to allow all participants to unmute just in case if that eases things up, Mark, and let us know if not. Otherwise, Andy, you should be able to ask your question now.
Thanks, Matt. That answered my question. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Hi, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
sounds
can.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you. You alluded to the 5-year commitment for the awardees. Is there a recapture process / penalty if an awardee was unable to fulfill that 5-year requirement? And then in that same vein, are awardees able to assign these awards at any point?
All right, so on the first question, recapture is something that we do typically work into contracts. So we could assume and expect to see that. That's a question that we can follow up with on after we talk with our legal department. But typically recapture is built in.
Okay.
And your second question, can you say that again? It sounded like you asked if awardees could then sub-award the funds.
Right, to a third-party
Okay.
provider or operator. Is there a potential for that if a site host was awarded an award and did not want to do all the heavy lifting.
Okay, so we did our best to try and foresee some questions we'd be answered or asked today. That was not foreseeable. So we do have our consultants and our team that would be able to, dig into this over the next couple of days and get back to you on that. And we'll have that added to the Q&A that will be posted publicly
Sure.
later this month. But good question.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, looks like there's one more in the chat.
I
no.
believe it's just Mark. Yep, he
Yep.
was confirming that we'd answered his question. So no other questions at
Good.
this time. If someone would like to raise a hand or ask one in the chat box. Again, if you've dialed in, you can hit *9 to raise your hand or *6 to go ahead and unmute.
Okay. Well, hearing none and seeing none.
Matt, this is Craig with Sterling. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we can.
Do you expect to place any value on applications where you have local partnerships with publicly owned utilities? I mean, I see there's a little bit of language in there that maybe alludes to some of that stuff, but I think obviously there's a much easier point of entry, and one of the other priorities you guys mentioned was about scheduling and getting it done. You would put a little more value on applications that could maybe more quickly get the projects completed. But just want to ask that, what are your thoughts about the public utilities?
So yeah, again, if we can go back to the scoring slide. That way we can show the points assigned for a couple different areas. So your partnership and your support would be an area where you'd be able to get some points for that, as well as the accelerated schedule. And then there's the demonstrated experience, business model, and budget. There's plenty of different areas where it seems like that type of partnership or opportunity would be able to be favored in a few different scoring categories.
Okay,
So
that answers the question well. I mean, I think it's interwoven in a lot of these. I mean, having the opportunity to control your own destiny when it comes to the electric utility and the charging stations.
right.
You're gonna have a little more faith that you're gonna last those 5 years and beyond, when you can kind of control those things. So thank you.
Yes. Great question. Thank you. All right. Again, we'll be accepting questions through the design contracts email address, and those will be open to being submitted until November 10th. And then our team will work on providing answers to those and getting those onto the KDOT webpage, where we'll be able to host the Q&A as well. So if you don't have any questions today, there's still plenty of opportunity to keep asking.
Will you send a copy of this deck to everybody?
Yeah, so we'll post the slide deck and the recording online. And once that's made available, we'll contact all the people that registered for today's event and make that announcement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, happy to stick around a couple more moments if anyone did have any lingering questions. It seems like we got to quite a handful of questions for people that were on. Yeah, I guess we'll just take this moment to thank everybody for having a little bit of time of their afternoon carved out for this, and we look forward to seeing your applications and your proposals for building out this network with us.